Leaking is information that is released in spite of relevant and agreed upon boundaries to keep it contained. Leaking information violates trust. Leaks can be intentional or unintentional. They can be calculated or accidental. Intentional leaks are often an unconscious attempt to gain power by someone who feels powerless. So Melissa talked about an example of someone who engaged in bad behavior in order to not be accountable. We also engage in bad communication behavior as a way of exerting power if we don't feel we have no other way. Martin Luther King said that violence is the language of the unheard. If I'm a member of a congregation and I don't feel heard or I don't feel valued, if no one is listening to me, then I may engage in actions that will get people to listen to me. It may not be out-and-out violence, but it's certainly doing psychic violence to the congregation. So we need to have agreements about what and how information is shared, and that's where covenants, again, come in. How many of you may not have a covenant of right relations, but have a covenant for your board? At a minimum, have a covenant for your board, the people that are making, unless you're in policy governance, that are making the day-to-day decisions of the congregation. The clearer the boundaries for releasing information, the less likely those boundaries will be ignored by someone leaking that information. The clearer the understanding as to why that information needs to be protected, the less likely those boundaries will be violated. So here comes the disclaimer, and this is an answer to an earlier question. In any church organization, there are congregational guidelines, ethical principles, and local and other laws that govern the dissemination of information. So leaders need to consider issues of right to know, which is information that members are entitled to under the law or under denominational guidelines. Leaders need to also consider issues around the need to know. And those generally include people who are a part of the problem, part of the solution to the problem, and or affected by the problem. Leaders need to consider when information needs to be revealed. For example, when it might result in harm to a person, or when past events are necessary to disclose that are affecting current and future activities, or when a minister needs counsel or consultation with another. And leaders need to be mindful of and consider legal issues like negligence, defamation of character, clergy privilege. And all I can suggest is that leaders pursue more fully their legal obligation and limitations before taking action on issues or events that might have punitive consequences. So not all of this is clear. Not all of this is black and white. There are times where we have a responsibility to withhold information. So let's talk about bad communication practices. And I'm sure that these will all be familiar to you. As I go through them, please raise your hand if you've been guilty of any of these within the past, 20 minutes. Communication patterns that are indirect, that reduce relational aspect, or unnecessarily expose private information can destroy a faith community. So there's triangulation. The single most common cause of conflict in any organization. So, John, hi, how you doing? I have to be honest with you, my friend. I've been standing up here, and I've been watching you roll your eyes at almost everything that I've been saying. I also saw you turn around and talk to Addie several times, even though I've asked you to sit up front and pay attention to me. Wait a minute, though. I don't... What congregation are you with? You're with Binghamton. Is Reverend Douglas here? I don't need to talk to you. I'm going to talk to your minister. And let him talk to you. That's what he's there for. So I have successfully engaged in triangulation. Instead of addressing my issues with John, which, by the way, he didn't do any of that stuff, I'll go to the minister and let the minister intervene with John. So I've created a triangle. So John, who would you prefer to be, Mo, Larry, or Curly here? Like you and me. We're not curly, actually. Or maybe we are, actually. Triangulation is the single most common cause of conflict in any organization. Sound familiar? It's when people don't go directly to the person with whom they have a problem. We do it all the time. We do it all the time. And sometimes when you get into that triangle, the roles can shift. So a couple of weeks later, I may go to John and say, Doug didn't do anything about this, and I'm really getting pretty tired of him doing all this stuff. So instead of going to Doug, now I'm the perpetrator of the problem. And then John will go, well, let me go talk to Doug and see if we can. So now John is trying to rescue me. So in triangulation, the roles can shift, but none of it is healthy. And then there's pass-through communication. Communication to get a message to someone, so instead of going directly to the person, you tell someone else. Like triangulation, it can involve three or more parties, but unlike triangulation, it generally is less emotional and less personal. It's like the game telephone. So I'll tell one person who'll tell somebody else, and then they'll tell a third person. And like in the game of telephone, by the time it gets to the third person, it usually is not the message that I intended. In congregations where people refuse to talk directly to each other, you get a lot of pass-through communication. And it's not healthy because people are going to add their own take to it, their own inferences, their own ideas as they go through the communication process. And then there's anonymous feedback. And a lot of people give feedback to avoid accountability and to avoid reprisals. So if you have a suggestion box, does anybody have a suggestion box? Good. Don't ever think of having a suggestion box. Because what you get are you get complaints, and you get like empty bubblegum wrappers. That's about all that a suggestion box is good for. But many congregations also send out anonymous surveys. How's the minister doing? How's the board doing? How's the worship committee doing? And the problem with anonymous feedback is that people can say whatever they want and they don't have to be accountable. It's damaging to people in the congregation because feelings are often expressed but cannot be resolved. Criticism is offered without the chance to explore the possibility of healing. And I, for one, seriously, made a decision a while back that I would never fill out an evaluation form without putting my name to it, even if there isn't a space to put my name on it. I hope that you all do the same, and then I can collect them, and I don't have to compare handwriting. Think about that, though. I mean, it's taking a bold stand. It's saying, here's what I think. Here's what I really enjoyed. Here's what I think it could have been a richer experience. And then putting your name to it. What a bold thing to do. Can you yell it out, and I'll rephrase, and I'll repeat your question or comment? You mean like in a survey or that kind of thing? What if the congregants are afraid to speak truthfully because they're afraid that they'll hurt someone's feelings? I think that this is more of a systemic question, and you ask really good questions, by the way. But I think this is more systemic. You can go to the person and you can talk to them about why they're afraid, what is the anxiety that they're worried about. But it's the noise in the system. If people are afraid to speak truthfully, then there probably are other people that are afraid to speak truthfully. So it's a systemic problem, and the leadership needs to address it on that basis. And it might mean congregational meetings to talk about how honest, how truthful we're being with each other. Or small forums where people come together and maybe feel more comfortable to share their fear of addressing things directly. So stuff like that, I would assume that if one person is afraid to, then there are others as well. And I would address that more on a systemic basis.